Hello, welcome to another video. In this one we're looking at 10 ways to improve the pulling movement pattern. So far we've looked at squatting, pushing, so we'll look at the opposite of pushing being pulling. So like with the other patterns that we've discussed so far, the first thing you really need to do is ensure you have mobility to be able to complete them. So one of the very first things I do is work on thoracic mobility. So this foam rolling, very simple to do, really trying to encourage good thoracic extension because it's going to be necessary in order for you to complete any pulling action correctly. So if I just take that back, basically where you want to be for these thoracic rolling is just work on the upper back area and make sure that you cradle your. Sometimes I'll tell people cradle their neck more than their head, just to allow the cervical spine to have freedom to move itself, because basically all you're trying to do is just mobilize this area of the spine, so just this part here. You don't want to roll on the lower back, all right? So it's quite simple to do, maybe 30 seconds, minute, it may be all you need. Once I've done the thoracic extension, I want to work on thoracic rotation. And this is usually a lot harder, and people with issues in the thoracic area where the upper back is really locked up, all of the pulling exercises, especially the horizontal ones, can really create significant stiffness. And what we see with that is a lot of neck pain resulting. So this exercise here helps to try and free it up, and you can see how Mel's got quite good range on this, so almost pretty much like 180 degrees of range of motion there. So someone with a lot of stiffness, if we just play it on the other side, which I think she's even better on this side, someone with a lot of stiffness will probably only get a range around about there. And this will have a lot to do with how the scapula is functioning. There's so much stiffness in the rhomboids, the middle traps, everything's just locked up. Now that's a real problem when you start to do pulling movements, because it'll really create a lot of trouble and eventually shoulder pain. Initially neck pain you'll have, but shoulder pain will be an end result of loss of mobility at this region. So very important to free it up right at the beginning of like learning how to get this pattern right. Without this mobility you'll never get this pattern right, and even more so with chin-ups and things as well. Now, in terms of a stretching, I wouldn't actually stretch the upper back area. I'd be actually stretching the antagonist to it, which is usually the pecs. And this is one of my favourite ways to stretch the pecs. And this is a myofascial stretch. So the reason it's myofascial is that we're pulling from the wrist when she pulls her wrist backwards in this direction, and at the same time pushing her chest up away from it in this direction. We're getting a pulling effect on not just the pec itself, but the bicep tendon and also the forearm. So everything that's associated with flexion that contributes to the pecs becoming tight, we're actually releasing the entire fascial chain. All right, so this is a great way to do this. And again, it brings in a little bit of this rotation element as well. So, you know, not a great deal, but it's a great way to release it. So always understand that the pecs, especially the pec minor, are going to inhibit the strength of the pulling muscles of everything in the back and the rear deltoids, everything that that's trying to be strengthened. If the pecs are dominating, they're going to inhibit them from working correctly. All right, so now we've done so far we've done thoracic extension, thoracic rotation, releasing of the pecs. Now we're into the strengthening. I'll start with this cable one first. It's very simple. Really easy to most people to get right. I prefer the single arm over the two arm for the simple reason that it brings in this thoracic rotation again, and it's usually a huge problem with people on pulling actions. Now the other thing with this is I can really get to see where this good scapular placement, so you can see how her elbow is away from her body there. Often you'll see on these exercises this elbow comes in real close, there's actually no gap, and they'll actually over-recruit all of this area. They'll get no work into the weaker part, but worst of all is this scapula will start to dive in this way. So you begin to lose your upward rotation. That scapula's got to sit out a little bit wider, and hence the easier cue to say is keep your fist, like a fist width between your elbow and your rib cage there. All right, just like that. All right, so That's a huge problem we see that becomes a chronic neck pain, tensing, thoracic problem ongoing. So once you've got the one arm one, more an integrated approach of the dual arm, and we can actually build in a bit of a squatting pattern at the same time. So I prefer this version over the seated cable row just because it brings into play the way we would really try to use, like where our legs are instigating it and then the arms are finishing the movement. And again, the same position with those arms, those elbows, you don't want them diving in too close. And you can really see the muscle activity here through the rhomboids and the upper back muscles. When she gets to that point there, you can really see them going into retraction, which is normal here, but when it comes forward that you should be able to get that scapula wrapping around and coming away. All right, so that'd be a really powerful exercise, this one. This is a really good one. Very simple. Again, the skill level's quite low, so beginners are really suited to these first two exercises. This next one's also very simple. Again, a few mistakes seen with this one, like from side-on positions, people lose their posture quite quickly. Again, we might see the elbow diving in too close to the body. Actually, people feel quite strong with it when it is quite close like that, but it does really ruin, like we've discussed already, the timing. The arm position here, Mel's showing like a neutral grip with it, so that the thumb's pointing forward. I might prefer where the hand is turned around, so that dumbbell would be like in this way. I often might prefer to do it that way, but it's neither wrong or right. It's just the prone position just encourages better scapular placement. All right, so that'd be our dumbbell one arm row. Again, skill level's quite easy. Haven't really challenged with anything super difficult as yet. And now, when we look at this next one, we will start to see the difficulty rise considerably. So this is where we look at the bent over row. All right, so this is a much more advanced one than the ones we've seen so far. And for the simple reason we're including the deadlift action in the bending pattern. And most people really struggle with the bending pattern anyway. So that's often the reason why people get this one wrong. It's not the lack of arm strength, it's the poor bending pattern that they just can't get in the right position to begin with. Right, so you really need to be in this beautiful hot Romanian deadlift, and you can see that there's a perfect position there. Look at that. All right, so she's basically just going to drive this up. The other thing, because we've done a few of these exercises in a row, it's starting to get quite fatigued, and you'll see how she'll lose her posture just because of the fatigue. And that's where, when the bar comes up, just as it's getting arms, see her neck's diving forward there. If we had done this exercise first, she would have been able to maintain in a much more neutral position. Again, we don't want to see the elbows come too far past the body, because if that does happen, it pushes the shoulder forward. You don't want that. All right, but this is an excellent exercise of all the pulling ones. This would be the one you'd really want to get to for horizontal pulling at least. All right, so that looks at our bent over row. So now let's look at a couple of the other progressions that start to get a little bit tougher, as we've seen in the previous patterns. We couldn't do a video on pulling action if we didn't include the chin-up. So obviously there's a few different variations of the chin-ups, with different hand grips and stuff like that. But we'll just start with the simple neutral position of the chin-up. Obviously, again, a very tough exercise for most people. Like most females really struggle. Probably 98% of females won't be able to do a chin-up unassisted. It can be a great way to build incredible strength, not just in the arms, but in the lats. The lats are the real, people who haven't done this, if we'll just bring it down a bit. So the lats under here, that's where they're under a huge stretch right now. This is what gives the blokes that V sort of shape as well. So really under huge load, huge stress here. Obviously the biceps and the forearms grip strength is a huge factor here, because you've got your whole body weight hanging on the bar. Your core as well is the other thing that most people get really surprised about, how sore it gets after the first time they do it, because basically it's stopping your legs swinging backward and forward. Most people don't feel it at the time, but trust me, your abs are under a huge amount of stress when you're doing this exercise. But a great way to build some incredible strength into the pulling action, but in that vertical. So really opposing the shoulder press that we saw in the pushing pattern, we're developing the vertical pulling pattern. All right, so lat pull downs are a regression, a much better choice for most people. Adding bands to the chin up to make it easier is another good way to develop this movement pattern with less risk, and just making it doable, because simply people just won't be able to even execute a single rep. All right, so a great one if you can do it, a great one to build up to, but you're really going to have to spend a bit of time. I prefer the neutral grip for most people, by the way. The pull-up where you have the pronated grip and your hands out here, a lot more stress on the shoulder, so it comes with a lot more risk. All right, so to minimise the risk, just start with the simpler one and build up as you get better. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that, and let's look at the next one. Next on our list of pulling actions is battling ropes, or power ropes, or whatever you want to call them, but really very similar action to the squat row we saw earlier, but obviously just explosively much more explosive and much faster. And you can see just the timing of this is incredible. Like, it's a real whipping action. Very similar, like the legs are really involved again, but the power obviously in the arms, anyone who's done a lot of these will know. Really, there's so many versions of these too, so I'll just give you a couple, but this is just an advanced way to really develop the pulling action. I'll have a look at the next one, because the next one really probably takes it to another level. This next one probably a little bit too advanced for most people, because we include like a bit of a lunge stance, but it's really the alternating left and arm waves that they call it, that really brings in huge amount of strength, but massive coordination and brain control, really forcing left and right to work cooperating at exactly in a split second. Like, it's such a tough movement to get right, this one, but really like an advanced version of pulling strength. Group strength is a huge factor in this. The speed of it is really the load, so like 15-20 seconds is the maximum you want to use on these sort of exercises, but it can be a great way to really build up the strength endurance of the muscles, different to say the bent over row and the one arm row where it's maximal strength, more hypertrophy. This is a different type of strength again, and really moving into the explosive part of the movement, which is what we've seen on all the previous patterns. We were working from very slow to a little bit more load to then explosively fast, and you always want to work in that order. All right, so let's have a look at the next one. The last progression on the pulling one is definitely one of the trickiest ones to get right. Again, uses the position of the deadlift again. So this one's the hang clean. So basically you just got to lower yourself into that deadlift position, and then from here you've got to explosively pull vertically, but really the power is coming from the hips. The power is really coming from the hips driving forward. But so it's arguably more of a leg exercise than an upper body one, but it really does require a strong pulling action. So very, very advanced, not for something that for a beginner to get to really focus on. In this case, we can see Nathan is using the squat action at the end there to really, he's probably exaggerating it, the weight's not heavy enough, but if it was really heavy, he wouldn't be able to pull it from that high position anyway. But this first part of the movement, that's where he's just doing a pull action there, but the very first part of it is just where is where you see all the action being driven from there in that. So that's where you can see how the hips have really exploded forward, and the upper body's really ripping the bar up and back so that he can get his hands underneath the bar. That's basically so he can get down, and then that's when his butt drops down here to drop into a squat. But very, very powerful exercise. Great fun if you're really good at them, but quite tricky if you're not. All right. Just to give you a different angle of that hang clean, so he's from a front position. You can see here again, so loads up into this deadlift position, and then just has to explode instantly right up into that pull action. So you can see here as it's just driving up, how he rises up on his toes. You can see him up on his toes. Then he's got to sink underneath it quickly enough and then load it in that rack position right there. So his elbows drive forward. There's just so many moving pieces on this. So like I said, it's not really just a pulling action. There's just so many more moving parts. But it really is an advanced version of the pulling action, and a great one if you're good enough to do it. All right, you can get a lot of power from this one. All right, so that concludes our 10 ways to improve the pulling pattern.